from WBNE.
Howdy, yokes. Before we get started today, I just want to let you know this episode of Bacon and Eggs is brought to you by Baron Fig. There's a link in the description to get all of your pens and journals and writing-based needs, and I'll tell you more about that later in the episode. Anyway, here's an episode. Howdy, yokes, and welcome back to Bacon and Eggs. I'm Tyler Carlin.
I'm Ethan Edgehill.
And today we're making our fortune.
Or maybe we're just getting in a gunfight.
So tell them I'm coming.
And hell's coming with me.
Because today we're bringing you
Tombstone.
And that is not Tyler Carlin today. My Tyler Carlin replacement is James Swindell of being one of my best friends for always. Hi, James. How are you, buddy? It's so great to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. And thank you for the invitation to you and to Tyler. I know that he's
absolutely
happily on paternity leave right now, but I'm happy to fill in. There's some very big shoes to fill.
Yeah, he does have big feet and big hands, and he's a big presence for sure. We're getting by without him.
He always likes to tell me like how short I am. He's like, I thought you were taller. Like, no, I'm an average human being.
He's known me basically my whole life and knows that I'm short and loves to keep telling me that. So
yeah, I think that bleeds into our friendship too.
A little bit. Anyway, this movie was directed by George Cosmatos, and we'll talk more about that later on. It came out Christmas Day, December 25th, 1993, which was 9,999 days ago, which is wild. This is the second week in a row we're doing a movie that came out on Christmas, which is also wild. And it had a $25 million budget, made $56 million worldwide, got a 74% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a 94% audience rating and a 50 on Metacritic. Jesus. James, do you have a positive review of this movie for me from a professional movie critic?
I do. I need to wait for my phone to unlock and get on the right screen here.
You're good.
So this is from Time Out, but it has it's a top critic, but no one is listed as saying the thing.
I'm guessing that means that whoever wrote it got fired.
It's maybe. Well, but I do agree with their positive description of the film. It's there's a misguided romantic subplot and the ending rather sprawls, but mostly this is rootin' tootin' entertainment.
That is rootin' tootin' entertainment. That is wonderful. I have a negative review here from Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader. And Jonathan says, a lot of care and attention were obviously devoted to selecting locations, designing sets, and grooming handlebar mustaches. Much less attention went to making one believe that any of the events took place circa 1879.
Cool.
I don't think he's 100% right or wrong about that, honestly, but I don't truly think it matters. We'll get into that as we go on. I've got a listener review here from Allie from Discord who says, my mom introduced me to this movie a few years back and I've loved it ever since. I like how the actors don't really pull me out of it. They play their characters in a really believable way. This is, in my opinion, the best Western.
Like the hotel?
Like the hotel, yes. Just like the hotel chain. This is, in my opinion, Howard Johnson's.
This is the best hotel and pizza combination.
This is the Quality Inn of movies. And I'm going to give you a as well, not a listener review, but a personal review from my past life, in which one time me and my family were watching this movie, and my dad looked at my mom and said, "You know, Linda, this movie doesn't suck as much as I thought it was going to."
Was this his first time seeing it?
No, certainly not his first time seeing it. He's a big fan of the older Westerns.
Oh yeah,
I think if he was going to watch a movie about Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, he'd probably watch the Henry Fonda one, My Darling Clementine, from back in 45 or whatever. James, 0 out of 100. Where does this movie land for you?
I mean, I thought a lot about this. I was going to try to give it some sort of critical, put it under a critical lens and think about it and dissect it. And I said, no, I don't care. This is my absolute favorite movie. It's a 100 out of 100 for me.
Wild.
And the only reason why I say that is because I look at it, it is imperfect, but it is beautiful. It's amazing. It's quotable. The cast is amazing. So I I will give it a 100 out of 100 because it has a special place in my heart and in my life, obviously.
Clearly. For those of you not watching the video, James is currently surrounded by Pops from this Funko Pops from this movie, as well as a copy of the movie, the director's cut edition of the movie that he's missing the first disc of.
Yeah, I went to go watch the movie last night and I was like, wait, does my PS4 play DVDs? Which, yes, it does. But then all of a sudden, I open up the sleeve, I open up where the disc is supposed to be, and it's not there. So it's either in a DVD player somewhere or it's lost forever.
It's long gone.
Long gone.
So I am on behalf of my late mother, of whom this was one of her favorite all-time movies, I am also going to give this a 100 out of 100.
Yes.
Which
Love
is
this.
I did not expect you to say 100. I came in with this plan and I did not expect you to say 100. This movie rocks, y'all. There is nothing wrong with this movie.
There are things that I notice in the movie that I'm like, oh, that's kind of messed up, or what? But
It's so good though.
I can sit down and pick it up at any point of the movie, watch it. I annoy everyone in the room, unless it's my parents, because you can quote the movie at any point. It's amazing. Right.
Absolutely. One of the all-time most quotable movies. I mean, they just keep saying great things, right? And this movie is crazy. You were telling me before we started, so I want to come back to that conversation about George Cosmatos, the auspicious director of this movie.
Yeah. So I was doing some light reading on Wikipedia and IMDb, and I usually try to branch out from there if I'm looking for more specific things. But according to the trivia on International Movie Database, it says that Cosmatos was brought in late because the screenwriter was also the director, and that he was fired from the project. I forget the reason why, but Cosmatos was brought in on a suggestion of Sylvester Stallone, of all people, because he had just directed Rambo: Last Blood Part 2. So that's the second installment of the Rambo series. And he came in as a suggestion, but also it was stated that Kurt Russell was actually directing most of the film while they were still absent a director. So apparently he's just a shadow director, but it also talks about the trivia also talks about movies like My Dearest Clementine, that he found inspiration from a lot of the early, 1940s, 50s Westerns that he then drew inspiration from in order to complete the film. Apparently the original screenplay was a novel. It was meant to build out this entire world about the Earps and the people around them. And what it turned into was a much slimmer movie where literally in the beginning, you're like, that's this person, and that's this person, and that's this person. And we don't care anything about what that person does or is other than what their purpose is in the scene, which is not a bad thing. I didn't find myself caring about, Trolley Dake, or I forget his name, but, random people within the script. I just oh, we got introduced to them. That's lovely. Now let's continue with the story.
So I do want to just actually, I'm just going to straight up read this off the Wikipedia page because it does kind of back up what you were saying. If you look under the section on Wikipedia that says production, it reads, the film was shot primarily on location in Arizona, began shooting May 1993. The film was supposed to be screenwriter Kevin Jare's first job as director. He was quickly overwhelmed by the job, failing to get needed shots, falling behind shooting schedule. A month into filming, he was fired by producer Andrew Vania and replaced with George P. Cosmatos. Michael Bain, a close friend of Jare, considered quitting. Bain recalled feeling director Cosmatos had no understanding or appreciation of the screenplay. By the time of Cosmatos' arrival, though, all actors stayed on board. The new director brought in demanding, hard-nosed sensibility to the set, which led to some conflicts with the crew members, most famously cinematographer William Fraker. Meanwhile, Kurt Russell worked quickly with producer James Jacks to pare down Jare's sprawling script, deleting subplots and emphasizing the relationship between Wyatt and Doc. Russell has stated that he and not Cosmatos, who actually directed the film, as Jare's departure led to the studio's request. Russell stated that Cosmatos was brought in as a ghost director because Russell did not want it to be known that he was directing. Co-star Val Kilmer has supported Russell's statements about working heavily behind the scenes and stating Russell essentially directed the film. That's crazy. This ended up being good out of all of that.
It not only was it good, but it's turned into this cult classic. that like, can you imagine a film today that would have a nobody director, nobody to us at least,
right?
A nobody American film with a nobody director, an ensemble cast that like, I don't know, 30 years later just completely slaps.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine in an environment today where that would be the case. Now, people in the Discord may, start throwing out examples, and that's cool. I'm happy to hear about them so I can draw comparisons.
Sure.
But I cannot imagine that being the case today. I really can't.
No, I mean, like, yeah, movies.
Love Actually. I mean, but even then, that's not an American film.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like you don't get Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott. Well, you don't get Bill Paxton at all anymore, but you don't get the four of them in a movie together with a nobody director, right? Like and it would be nobody's directing debut for sure. It wouldn't be like, oh, this is the screenwriter, we're going to just give him the reins. It'd be like, no, we need to bring Joss Whedon in.
Yeah, we need Joss Whedon to finish this film, and then we're going to have, 24 months of bad reporting and bad relationships
and reshoots and making actors uncomfortable to the point where the original director, who's also a piece of crap, needs to come in and make his own version.
Yeah.
Release the Kevin Jer cut.
Release it now. We need a campaign. We're going to start it here today.
Kurt Russell would come kill us. That's just what would happen. I mean,
Hey, we would have called down the thunder. That's
for sure. No, the story in this movie is incredible. The acting is incredible. The cinematography is incredible. Like, this is, I think, probably the last like great Western that will maybe ever be made in the traditional sense.
I don't know. I mean, like True Grit, the 2010 remake of the original John Wayne film, on a couple lists I was looking up best Westerns of all time.
It's very good, but it is a remake, and B, very Hollywood. Like,
but it was also very good. I mean,
sure.
I mean, and it was filled with people that, I mean, Matt Damon, Josh Brolin, who played Scooter? What was his name? Jeff Bridges. Haley Steinfeld. Maybe,
Brewster, not Scooter.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry. I knew it was something random.
Yeah.
Brewster Cogburn.
Yes, True Grit. And I truly think that is the last great Western that'll ever be made, at least for a long time.
Sure. I mean, I saw on one list, Deadwood the movie. So the movie that was later based off the series, I saw was on a list of top Westerns somewhere. And I guess that's that's an original one too. And I mean, I would even bring Westworld in that conversation, only because it elicits so much of the genre of the Western of Western films. But I think you're right. Like, I think, and especially something like this that's so sort of entertaining and it's not campy. Like, this movie isn't entertaining and
but
campy.
It's campy enough, though. It's not like it never feels polished, right? It never feels like it's a game. It never feels like it's a play, right? Like, having Matt Damon in True Grit is a money sell, right? This movie never feels that way.
Right. No, I agree. It's not polished in the sense that it's like overly polished for Hollywood and to be able to sell it. I mean, this movie was released at Christmas, and many people believe, or at least I read people believe, that it was lost in the Hollywood shuffle of like Christmas time. So like the Christmas time, release sort of gave it a bad start, but it did make more money the next week. So we know that it was something, and I think Siskel and Ebert, I think one of them didn't like it and the other did. I read that on the Ebert website, and they said, I think it was Ebert that said, when you hear it once or twice from someone, it's like, okay, it's like a sort of, and by the time you start hearing it a week and 2 weeks afterwards, it's a trend, and like, oh, now I actually have to see this. They were never going to review the film.
Right.
And then because it got this word of mouth, marketing, the marketing of word of mouth is so powerful, because it got that powerful play from people, mainly because of the performances of Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell. That was what sold it to people.
Absolutely. I mean, Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday, as the tuberculosis victim, as the gunfighter, as the Southern gentleman, is like one of the all-time great performances.
Absolutely. But not the dentist. He was a dentist in real life.
Oh yeah, that's true.
He was a dentist in his early life before tuberculosis forced him to move out west. So I thought and what's funny is that I didn't know that. There was this old version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for like the computer back in the like compact days where your computer was as big as your table. And it was like one of the like $100 questions was like, what was Doc Holliday's profession or whatever.
Right.
And I had no idea he was a dentist, and I came to learn that he was a dentist. So that's kind of fascinating.
Being a dentist back then had to have been wild.
And he went to school in Pennsylvania, even though he was from Georgia. So this thing got around.
Yeah. And then he ended up out west.
Yeah.
Obviously he ended up out west because of the tuberculosis, but
what's funny about this is that Westerns are often based on characters that are real people, and the folklore that's created around their persona. Right. And so a lot of the details in this movie, and I'm sure in other Westerns as well, are sort of dramatized or changed to fit the narrative. Yeah. Like, for example, in this film, are we allowed to talk about spoilers right now?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So, for instance, in the movie, Virgil is shot in the arm, and then Morgan is then shot later that night. When in real life, those events happen months apart.
Right.
So, or for instance, it's not believed that Doc Holliday was the one that killed Johnny Ringo. They're not entirely sure who killed Johnny Ringo. In fact, he was shot in the temple like he was portrayed in the film, and the exit wound was the back of his head. Sure. But he was found dead. No one saw it happen.
Right.
So we can't confirm who actually did it. But what I do also love about this film is that they try to make the historical accuracies, make some details historically accurate. Excuse me. So, for example, the fight at the OK Corral, the gunfight at the OK Corral. There was a gunfight there, but it was near the OK Corral. It wasn't at the OK Corral, which was several clicks down the lane, so to speak. Or at the end of that gunfight, where I forget the character who's going up against Doc Holliday. He says, "I've got you now, you son of a bitch." And Doc Holliday says, "You're a daisy if you do." That was actually reported as
to be a real thing
that actually was said at that gunfight. So it was really interesting to sort of read up on this before, which I hadn't done. I just watched this ad nauseum, but to sort of see, where those things were reflected, in fact, in what happened, and then the things that didn't.
Right. And that's what's so fascinating about this story, especially about the Wyatt Earp, the Doc Holliday, the whole thing, is that it's a lot more recent than some of these other Western stories. And like, it takes place in a much later version of the Wild West than we know, right? Like, they're fully out in Arizona and California and like Los Angeles, San Francisco are places. And, they're not fighting in Dodge City, Kansas. It moved further west. It had moved into different problems and different booms, different boom towns and different gold rushes and railroads and all this other stuff. Like, it's a much more recent thing, and a lot more is like known about them. And there's like photographs of them and stuff because they lived during the Matthew Brady era and all that.
And it wasn't like on the heels of the Civil War. Like, I think that's when we think about that westward expansion, we're also thinking about conflicts that are still unresolved or new conflicts that arose from the Civil War. And we don't see any of the, gray and blue uniforms. We just see the main conflicts between Western cowboys who were lawless, didn't care for authority, and, these, deputies, whether they were at the town level or the federal level. And they oftentimes came to blows with each other because the cowboys were, really did outnumber,
Yeah.
authority in these towns because
Absolutely.
everything was so spread out. And not just physically, but then that meant that these people were spread thin to,
Right.
patrol, police these communities that are so far apart.
Absolutely. And well, the thing is, like, I have no idea where I was going with that, man. That train of thought like jumped in the station and then dipped completely. That was so weird. Hang on, let me see if I can bring that one back.
That's okay. But you talked about trains, and in fact, everything that has a train in it has to be your favorite.
That's true. Yeah, it does.
So,
this movie does have a train in it, so it definitely gets points for that one.
It does. It does have points for a train, and apparently, I read this in the IMDb trivia too. It's that they left on the same train that they came in on.
Really?
So it has the same number, and apparently the number is like a clinical code for someone who's going crazy. So like they attribute that to Wyatt going crazy on Ike Clanton.
Yeah.
In the scene where he says that he's calling down the thunder. Well, you got it. I think that's kind of a stretch. I think that's sort of editorialized, but nonetheless, like I think that is probably one of the more iconic scenes of this movie because it's connected from the beginning. That's the entire premise is that there's a horse and on him rode death, and that would be Wyatt Earp and the reckoning with the Cowboys, which was a real vendetta. Like he got his brother was killed. And a real person went out and killed cowboys to get back for his brother being killed. It's wild. It's actually wild.
Right. And these people were just here to like mine their silver and, mind their business. And they got caught up in all this, which is garbage. I mean, the Wild West seems like it sucked, man. I love Westerns. I love Westerns so much. I never get tired of them. Like every time everybody's like, I'd love to go to Hogwarts and like live in the Harry Potter universe. I would never want to go to the Wild West, man. Like, unless it was like Westworld and I could just not die. But I've seen Westworld and it doesn't go well.
Right. Well, I mean, that's just like the one instance, right? Well, I guess the two instances, if you want to talk about the Man in Black and then ultimately the end of season 1. But no, I mean, like, I think that's one thing that was really clever about Westworld was that they were able to capture the chaos and able to market that to people in a way that was like that really real from what you see in these movies, right? And we see that we're supposed to see that in this film when Virgil, Morgan, and Wyatt are having that conversation about, how much, maybe they can go into business for their own. They can do this, they can do that. And the town, I think the mayor of the town comes in and says, you're a lawman. Why don't you help? And he's like, I'm busy.
Right.
They don't want to get involved. And the scene directly after that, where the Cowboys run through with guns ablazing and almost run this kid over, and they could see the terror on people's faces. That's exactly the thing that they were trying to, set up and show, was that these towns, while they were filled with opportunity, while they were, expansion and, there's limitless possibilities, also came with its risks. And its risks were, lawless vigilantes, so to speak, who didn't care for, the rules of society that was trying to, build out west.
Well, and Westworld's was originally a Michael Crichton vehicle, right? Like the Jurassic Park guy.
Yeah.
Which, he directed the first movie, the original movie.
Which,
like,
funny
way
enough,
before Jurassic Park.
Funny enough, yeah. Actually, so I've looked into him a lot because I recently watched a lot of ER, which is also hit one of his creations.
Yep.
And so to see sort of where his fingerprints are such an amazing timeline of cinematic and like television like impacts like on our lives. So Jurassic Park, Westworld, which has sort of been revived and now living a new life on HBO. But speaking of Michael Crichton, like Jurassic Park was actually the top film of 1993, highest grossing film in 1993.
Yep. Made a lot of money.
Right. And to me, what I love about this film is that like it's modern enough to where you have to think, okay, like what can we compare it to? Like, what are we comparing it to, or what did it come out along with? Mrs. Doubtfire, The Sandlot. Like, these are Hocus Pocus even came out that year. These are all movies that are like,
the fact that The Sandlot was not made in the 80s is shocking to me, honestly.
1993.
I would have thought for sure that was an 80s movie, right with the Goonies.
It was on that list. But the Sandlot, Hocus Pocus, I mean, like, all of these things, whether it's a children's film or whether it's like a cult classic like this, or even just a classic film like Jurassic Park, are all still huge contributors to popular culture today. Right. Mrs. Doubtfire, even. I mean, I know that Mrs. Doubtfire is starting to become a little dated as far as like some of the tropes that are in the film. But like, to see a lot of these films still sort of hold up today. It's 1993, so it's 2021. I mean, it was a long time ago. Yeah,
it was 28 years almost this movie came out, 27 and a half years.
I'm glad you did math, because I was having a hard time doing it in the moment.
I was born in 1993, James. I don't have to do math. I just know how old I am.
That's good. That's good. I can never keep up with people's individual ages. I can always keep up with their birth dates. I just have to write it down. Like, even today, my sisters, both of my sisters, I have the date, not the date that they were born, but the month and the year that they were born, because everyone asks, how old are your sisters? Well, they're old enough to where they're not close to me. They're at least 15, 20 years older than I am. So I have to always refer back to a number. But yeah, you were just saying that before we started recording, that 93 was the year that you were born.
I was like 3 months old when Jurassic Park came out.
That's crazy. I mean, I was 3. By the time this movie came out, I was 3. I was born in September, so of 90. So I was 3 years old. There's no way I remember this film. I think the first film that I have an early remembrance of was Toy Story and the Goofy movie. Those were 2 movies I explicitly remember. But also, like, Bill Paxton was in Twister, which I remember. I remember seeing a lot of like commercials for when I was a kid. So it's not like I don't remember these actors. But I do remember, I never remember watching this film until much later, probably when I was in college with, when we were, first introduced.
Right.
And it's funny too, because like everyone that you talk to, if it's not your parents, so you, me, and I believe Allie, the listener that you read her review, everyone was introduced to this film by their parents.
Yeah.
So I can't think of many other people, unless your parents.
Well, James, it's an R-rated gunfight movie. It wasn't like Toy Story where people were watching it in the theaters when they were kids, right? Like, they were introduced to it by their parents. I guess because, that's a fair point. Like, that's when it came out, right? Like, now there are people that are old enough at this. It's old enough at this point that there are people that could be like, I just want to watch a Western, and they'll put on Tombstone, right? Like, and that's the first time they've seen it.
Although I love when I rented the film last night on Amazon because my disc was missing. It said that it was a number one bestseller in romance.
Really?
Which I find to be
really now
fantastic, because like the romantic subplot is like the jankiest part of this whole movie. It has like no sort of seriousness to it.
No, not at all.
Other than it's like the high schooler who comes into the room and gets nervous around the girl that he likes and then runs away up until the moment he finally asks the girl out to prom or whatever.
Sure.
But like, that's, I cannot believe that a movie like this would be listed number one in romance.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. But I mean, I guess those things, it's not like they're surveying people and being like, why did you watch Tombstone, right? It's just like, it's a successful movie that has the romance tag attached to it somehow. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I cannot for the life of me understand why, but like
it's not a bestseller in romance because of its romantic subplot. It has a romantic subplot and happens to sell well, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Like, therefore, it's causation, correlation, not causation, right? Like,
right. And it has that tag and it sells well, right? Therefore,
right, because they'll tag anything they can romance, basically. It's like if people, fall in love in it or whatever, then it's romance.
Right, yeah. And they do. I mean, like in real life, Wyatt Earp and Josephine Marcus were common law married. They weren't actually married. And it's the same thing with Maddie Blaylock. Apparently her name was Maddie Earp, and she was listed in 1880 census as married to Wyatt Earp. But there's I don't think there's no real conclusive evidence to suggest that they were actually married, just like in the movie.
Right. Where she's just around and she just kind of sucks, and then he falls in love with somebody else. And it's complicated.
I've got a dog barking on my side.
We're good.
You're good. So what I also enjoy about this movie is so the first half of it is really solid. It's like tightly knit. It moves really well. And then, like I read in the positive review, it kind of sprawls at the end.
Sure.
And I think you can start seeing where the script sort of breaks down as far as sort of the continuity of it, and to try to condense it in a way that moves the plot toward the end of the film, or at least to where they wanted it to go.
It's a very straightforward movie where like A happens, and then B happens, and then C happens, and then D happens. And then for some reason, Curly Bill walks out in the street and shoots his gun at the moon.
Because he's high. And then it's anybody's guess from there on out, right? Like, that's the moment where they were like, you know what? Screw a script. We're just going to do it. Full send. Yeah, and you can see, I mean, like, this is when I was watching it last night, I was like, what I really think this movie could use is the modern day streaming treatment, where you can then expand on some of these ideas or just turn into a mini series. I mean, like, it doesn't need to be like, picked up by Netflix for 4 or 5 seasons. It could be like a season mini series if you really wanted it to. If you didn't want it to get too crazy. But like, I feel like it could use that sort of treatment, because that was the intention behind creating a movie like this.
Well, and I do think it's so interesting as a movie, and this is why I think that it maintains its cult classic status, is because it does meander, and it is crazy, and it doesn't always make sense, right? It's not perfect and put together the way something like True Grit or Brokeback Mountain or those modern movies are, that are just trying to be very emulative of the original Westerns. This has it's that 50% marriage between, your High Noon, your Gary Cooper, Ward Bond type movies, and your Clint Eastwood spaghetti Western movies. It's like, it's right in the middle of those, where you have these things that don't make sense, and it's kind of dark and almost a little bit scary, and like people just die left and right, but like not in like a funny way. But it's also like, it is definitely an American movie and not an Italian movie, and they're using these actors making great monologues, and like not a lot of it is at the expense of, I mean, some of it is, but not a lot of it is at the expense of the Mexicans, which is like a hallmark of the Clint Eastwood days. So it's like, it's this perfect marriage between the original Hollywood Western and the Italian, the spaghetti Westerns of the later color era. And that's truly why I think it's so good and why it stands up so well, is that it's just a little bit messy, right? But like in a good way.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are definitely touches of imperfection in this movie, like both in like its sort of plot, and how it trots along, but also like and how it was shot. So there's the scene where he confronts Billy Bob Thornton's character at the faro table.
Right.
Is one of the parts that makes me laugh every time, not because of the scene itself, but because you can tell that something film was inserted into the scene where it wasn't originally there. So if you watch the movie, he's smacking Billy Bob Thornton around. He says, "I said, throw down, boy." And but earlier than that, he goes to pull his gun. He says, "Go ahead, skin that smoke wagon and see what happens." But that piece of a film, you'll go back after this and watch it. It's literally like spliced into the scene.
Right.
And then it cuts really quick back to Billy Bob Thornton's face. And you're like, wait, am I like hallucinating? Did that just happen? So it's so funny to me. It's like, I didn't realize this probably 2 or 3 years ago. I finally saw it and was like, oh, wow. I wonder what happened there. Like, what was the scene supposed to be before? But it was just, I think, a sound bite that they had, and they were just like, oh, it goes well right here in this part of the scene.
Right. Well, and it's like, it's wild because that scene, Wyatt Earp comes up to him and just says some absolute nonsense, right? Like, it's very jargon. Like, he says this, skin that smoke wagon. It's like you're saying nonsense, like absolute garbage words right here. But the rest of the movie is these like wonderful, eloquent sentences. They quote the Bible all the time and like in multiple languages and have like an interpretation error there. And it's like these beautiful written lines. And then all of a sudden in this scene in the bar, Wyatt Earp's just like, hey, kid, I'm going to slap you in the face. What just happened?
And then the funny part is that he throws him out, and he comes to confront him, and then like no one believes that he's Wyatt Earp in the entire the entire beginning of the film
until Doc Holliday backs him up. Yeah,
but he doesn't even say his last name. He just says Wyatt, Morgan, Virgil, and the guy's like, Wyatt Earp?
Oh no!
Oh man. Okay, I guess I should be scared of you now, even though you just slapped me around, made me bleed, and then threw me out of my own job.
And I love that we never talk about what any of them did prior, right? Like we don't talk about any of their other exploits hardly at all in this movie.
Yeah, you get just enough background to everything and everyone in this film that it makes it work. Like in today, like look at something like, I don't know, you can even talk about the DCEU or the MCU, for example. You can't just have a single installment where it just is like it just maybe Justice League. League's the best example I can find of this. They introduce new characters, but they introduce you, and not the Snyder cut, but the theatrical release. When it was released, it relied mostly on introducing a character and saying, this is as much as you need to know about the character. Right. And if you went along with that, you're like, okay, I had a good enough time. And that would never work for something like an installment of the MCU, for example, because every character has to have a beginning, a motivation to be, the person that they are, or a continuation of a storyline that happened previous. And in this movie, it relied on, okay, these are the Cowboys. Here are their motivation. Here's Wyatt Earp. He's doing this. Doc Holliday. He's doing that.
We get a good intro on the Cowboys, right? We get a good intro scene with them. We get none of Doc's, we get a little bit of Doc's backstory. We get none of Wyatt's backstory. Like, if you make this movie tomorrow, this movie starts with 20 minutes of Wyatt Earp backstory of like a young Wyatt as a sheriff in this town or whatever, doing whatever he did. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like that's how this movie starts today. And that's garbage.
Yeah, you get 20 minutes of that, and then you release this film, and within 2 weeks after its success, there are rumors
you
that
greenlight the prequel. Yeah,
you greenlight the prequel in development with Adam Driver as
Wyatt. Yeah, it's called Wyatt.
Yeah, something like that. Or Wyatt Russell is in the role because it's quite on the nose, but apparently he was named after Wyatt Earp.
Oh, he'd be so good at it too.
When I was watching Falcon Winter Soldier, there were times where he would say something. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's his father. Like that's spitting. Not only is he spitting image of his father, but he also reacts to like to scripts like his father.
Oh wait, hang on. Wyatt Russell's Kurt Russell's kid?
There you go.
Oh my God, I learned this minute.
Yes. And apparently his name was Wyatt because of his time working
Wow,
on Tombstone.
that's wild. Yeah.
That's sort of nuts too. But I learned that recently as well. Yes.
Well, dang, now I want this Wyatt Earp prequel with Wyatt Russ. That's cool. I want that to happen now.
And apparently all the mustaches were real. So
yes.
I know that he's got the beard going on, Wyatt Russell does, but I'm sure he could do the mustache really well.
Sure, yeah. The mustaches are great. I mean, they're their own characters, especially Doc's.
Well, and especially in this film too, because everyone's got this legit, like facial hair. Like every character, has got some degree, unless you're like young. Like a lot of the characters who were young in the film didn't have facial hair.
Billy Zane didn't have facial hair when he showed
Billy
up
Zane
as a 12-year-old theater actor.
Yeah. Billy Zane, Thomas Hayden Church, who surprisingly enough, this was his first like movie credit.
That's crazy.
Like this was his like introduction to movies. Oh yeah, like if you go to the Wikipedia page
As
of
Billy
like
Clinton.
movies in yeah, if you go to the Wikipedia page for 1993 movies, it gives you the highest grossing films, notable films of 1993, and then it'll also give you like like people's acting debuts,
Right.
like Ellen DeGeneres and Coneheads. Like things like that. I mean, I know Jennifer Aniston made her film debut that year, but Thomas Hayden Church, who many listeners, if they were not old enough to be alive in the 90s or early 2000s, but he was in Spider-Man 3. He was the teacher from Easy A. The
first place I saw him was in George of the Jungle.
Oh, he was in George of the Jungle.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what a
Lyle
good film.
Vandergroot. He was like the like rich
villain,
guy from New
right?
York. Yeah, the villain.
Oh yes, that was such a good movie for like 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old me.
Oh yeah, same. That was like one of my favorite movies for a while.
Like that's what I don't understand. Like Brendan Fraser was in The Mummy, he was in Encino Man, and he was in George of the Jungle. Like 3 drastically different films.
Well, and he's been in all kinds of, but that was his like heyday.
Yes.
Because he was in like Blast from the Past and around that, all those things around that same time.
What's the one, Center of the Earth? Was that the movie?
That was later on, yeah.
He was in that. He was in Bedazzled, where he like got wishes, and he had to live out his life based on the wish that he made. Like he made a deal with the devil, and the devil was the woman from Austin Powers 1. I forget her name.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
And then Encino Man. He was in one other thing that was like big, but yeah. So like it's kind of weird because some of these actors are very much like Brendan Fraser, where like you don't see them because that's their heyday. But some of them, actually, I would say most of the A-list guys and gals, and maybe even the high Bs, are all people that are in, have influenced classic movies or are in modern day movies. So take, for instance, Kurt Russell and Norman Reedus. No, that's not that's the wrong guy. Norman
Reedus is from Walking Dead.
Yes. But was he Daryl? I'm talking about Merle, the guy who plays Merle from Walking Dead. Was McMasters in this film, and he played Yondu in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, along with Kurt Russell, who played Ego.
If you hadn't asked for the name, I would have been able to tell you. Hang on a second, Michael Rooker.
Yeah, Michael Rooker. Yeah. So Michael Rooker and Kurt Russell, or Val Kilmer, of Top Gun and Batman fame. Sam Elliott, he was in.
Sam Elliott, I would say, is one of the most prominent and prolific C-list actors ever. Like,
I mean, and his most recent work, I've got to say, has got to be really cool. He was in Grace and Frankie. He was in Star is Born. Oh, he was in the Netflix one with Ashton Kutcher. The Ranch.
Yes.
Which I don't know. It's not like top tier material, but if you're looking for something that's just silly and fun and like complicated and you still enjoy a laugh track, like that is the show to watch. It reminded me a lot of my dad, like my relationship with my father, at times. I can't recommend The Ranch enough. Although it goes off the rails, though, after Danny Masterson's sort of unfortunate demise.
Right.
But and I say unfortunate as in it's unfortunate that it happened.
Yes, that it happened and that it has ruined so many great things.
Correct. But it sort of fell off the rails there, but it's very good.
And never count anybody that was in this movie out. Thomas Hayden Church put in his absolute best performance of his entire life in 2019.
In that show Divorce?
No, in the Peanut Butter Falcon.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, James, man, he plays this like washed up wrestler. Oh, made me cry like a little child. He did.
I'll have to watch
Oh,
that. Yeah,
you
I
got-
saw that was on his movie credits.
You got to go watch that. That movie is incredible.
Yeah, Bill Paxton, was in
God, yeah,
so
rest
many
in peace,
classic
man.
films. Yeah, I mean it's unfortunate his passing. He was born in 1955, so he's the age of someone like my father, for example. Right. But I saw him last in The Circle with Emma Watson. It was based on the book of the same name. Apparently, did not end the same way as the book did. So anyone who is very like gung ho in having those books, in their film adaptations match the books. I would tread lightly there when it comes to The Circle. But Bill Paxton was in so many movies. The actor who played Johnny Ringo was in Aliens. Most recently featured in The Mandalorian in the episode with Ahsoka.
This is Michael Biehn.
Yes.
Yeah, because he was in nothing after Tombstone that was worth talking about prior to The Mandalorian.
He was in Aliens, wasn't he?
Yeah, in 86.
Oh, well, yes. Okay. So 86 is okay.
Yeah.
You have made your point there, sir.
Yeah.
Michael Rooker. And then even Charlton Heston, who was of Planet of the Apes fame. Also,
yes, the Ten Commandments, one of the biggest movie stars to ever live. Yes, James.
Yeah, Ten Commandments.
A real nobody prior to this movie.
Formerly the head of the NRA, Charlton Heston. Yes. So
it's got quite the cast for sure.
And I think that's one of those things too, like having an ensemble cast like that, where yes, Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell both sort of stole the show, but I can't think of like a single person I would look at and be like, oh man, if it wasn't for them, maybe this would have fallen apart. Like this was truly like a team effort that like made this entire film work.
Right. Well, I think this is the last thing Robert Mitchum ever did as well, was to be the narrator in this movie.
Apparently he was supposed to be in the movie and he fell off a horse and injured himself. And so they recast him as a narrator.
Yeah.
That's what I read.
Well, he was only in hundreds of movies.
Yeah. But I mean, like it's just crazy to me that this movie shouldn't have been made, like after what I've read. The fact that it came out at all is a miracle, but to be so good, to be so pervasive in the canon of Westerns as well, like it's just insane. And it's got like a 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I mean for a cult classic, like a lot of cult classics can be like a really big miss as far as like being critically acclaimed.
Yeah.
So for it to be like a 76 and then to look at the audience score and be almost universally loved by people, for every 9 people that loved it, 1 person didn't. I think that's sort of an amazing accomplishment, and especially something that lasts over time like this.
Right. That it almost seems like more and more every year that people are like, yo, we got to go back and talk about this. I mean, that's the truth of any cult classic movie, right? Is they never really caught on, and this caught on more than most did.
It actually caught on way better than Wyatt Earp, the Kevin Costner film that came out within 6 months.
Right.
And it did not receive the same critical acclaim.
Right. Well,
even at the time. So it's like
they made that Steve Jobs movie with Ashton Kutcher.
and then
turned around and Michael Fassbender was like, hang on.
I'm going to do this. Let me do this Jobs thing.
And I maintain that the main thing wrong with that Jobs movie that Ashton Kutcher was in is that nobody nobody looks up what young Steve Jobs looks like, right? And that's the problem, is that he looked exactly like Ashton Kutcher. So like Ashton Kutcher in that movie just looked like Ashton Kutcher being the founder of Apple. Right. There was no sell to that, right? Like, cause he didn't wear the turtlenecks and have the beard and the baldness or anything. But then you go and look at like Steve Jobs in the 80s or whatever, in the 90s, and he looks exactly like Ashton Kutcher with the beard.
That's funny. That's so funny.
That just, it ruins the movie without even meaning to, right? Because they did exactly what they had to do, which was get the guy that looks like.
Sell me this pen.
Oh, you want pens? I got pens. This is my favorite pen in the whole world. It's blue. For those of you who are not watching for those of you who aren't watching the video, imagine a blue pen that's like blue on the outside, but writes black when you write with it. This is the Baron Fix Squire pen that I bought a few months ago. And this is my favorite pen I've ever owned in my life. It's from today's sponsor of this podcast, but like they didn't give this to me. I bought this because I love this pen so freaking much. Tyler and I are both huge proponents of having a great pen, a great writing utensil. And like a great story starts with, they say with guitars, they say tone starts in the fingers. A great story starts in the pen. You got to have a great pen. So what I want you to do is go in the link in the description of this podcast. There's a link down there, and it's going to get you $10 off your first purchase at Baron Fig on us. They make pens, they make journals, they make notebooks, they make sketchbooks, they make all kinds of little creative paper-based endeavors, things that allow you to create things on paper. They're the best company for this. The journals are fantastic. The pens, obviously, like I said, best pen ever. It's just so nice to touch it. It's like a BMW of pens. I love this pen, and I have the opportunity to sell you this pen, just like Jordan Belfort said. So I'm going to tell you to buy this pen. You can't write your name without a pen. So go in the description of this podcast, go in the show notes, and buy one of these pens. This is the Squire in slate blue, the Squire Classic now it is called, in slate blue. Buy this pen, tag me at Wow Now on Twitter, at Edgehill Photos on Instagram, pictures of you with this pen you bought, because it's the best pen. Show me what you write with it. Create great things. Buy this pen.
It's similarly, it's like the people that play in movies that just play themselves. So like every Tracy Morgan movie, for instance, is just Tracy Morgan in the role of X. Right. But you might as well just rename the character Tracy Morgan and just suspend all disbelief. Like Tracy Morgan is in Coming to America 2, and he's actually the uncle of, Eddie Murphy's, love child or whatever it was, which I thought was very funny. People should watch Coming to America 2.
I haven't seen it. Yeah, it's also coming number 2 America.
Yes. No, I enjoyed it. We'll have to talk about it after you saw it, but for sure. It hit all the right notes for me.
Absolutely.
The one thing, there are two things I wanted to talk about. One thing that was really quick though was that we talked about things being janky, and I gave you the example of like how it was like sort of that scene was sort of spliced together. But
right.
Have you ever noticed after Morgan Earp's death, Wyatt Earp walks into the middle of the road in the rain?
Yeah.
And if you're watching the scene, it's literally raining right there in the middle of the street. But if you look just down the street, it's not raining.
It's only raining on top of Wyatt. Yeah.
It's only raining on top of him.
They pull to the wide shot, and it's extremely obvious.
Yeah, it's super dry on the far end of town.
Right.
And you can literally see the stage manager go, and cue Josephine. She runs in, and they go, "Don't you see? Like, leave me alone." And she's like, and he says, "Get away from me." And she runs away, and they do a turn towards the Crystal Palace, which is, sort of towards where the bar that he just left. And down the alleyway between the two saloons is a street that's bone dry.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I literally look at that scene and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's supposed to hit this climax of the scene. He's wiping blood on him, and I'm literally in the corner rolling in laughter because it's not raining at the far end of town.
That doesn't take me out of it though, because I came up on Westerns, right? Like I've seen so many that it feels to me like an homage instead of a mistake, right? Like,
no, I don't feel like it was a mistake. I feel like it's just a product of being made in the early 1990s, right?
That's not what I mean, Bill, because they clearly have the capacity to make things rain properly in the 90s, right? Like this came out, this is being filmed basically the same time as Titanic.
Okay.
And that movie's obviously, this is being filmed at the same time as Jurassic Park.
That's true. That's true.
The special effects
were able to
that hold up perfectly to this day.
That's very true. That's very true.
I always felt like there was a lot of direct choices to sort of follow and again, this is why I think that it stands up like that, and why it doesn't feel so polished and so Hollywood, is because I feel like these were direct choices made on purpose to be reminiscent of older Westerns, especially with how clued in people like Kurt Russell were to previous Westerns and interpretations of these stories. Is like it felt completely normal to me watching the actual movies where they couldn't afford to make, where they had to rain right on top of the camera, right? Because they couldn't afford to make it rain everywhere else, or they had to wait for it to rain to do the movie or whatever, you know?
Right. Or I sent you actually a video from Now This. I believe it was Now This. It could have been something different, but it was about 1917. Because I know that you guys covered it last week.
Yes.
And they were talking about in this snippet about talking about how it was a continuous take, how if the clouds were out, they couldn't shoot, or vice versa. So they had to literally wait during the day for the sun to come out in order to continue the shot.
Right.
So it's funny how sort of these things happen. Like at one scene, it's like thundering and lightning, and they said part of it, like when you're inside, I think they said that was all manufactured by machines, by a lightning machine.
Right.
But when they're shooting the stuff outside, that's all real.
Yeah.
So it's funny that like you said, the choices that they had to make in order to, sort of either simulate or to gain the effect of what it was like to be living in this hot Western town. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is it always felt like gaining the effect to me. Like even in the scene where Morgan dies, when he he gets shot in the back while he's playing pool and just like falls over in real time. Like it felt so much like old gunfighter movies to me.
Yeah.
They were very much just like going for a thing instead of just trying to be like, okay, let's make the best movie we can. It's like, no, let's make the right movie kind of thing, you know?
Definitely had some Zack Snyder slow-mo action going on.
Yeah.
In those scenes. Although I would say it's vice versa. He got, inspiration from the slow-mo, but no, I agree.
Slow-mo pre-2000, pre-digital cameras was so bad, man. Like
Oh,
old slow-mo when they're just let's run it at 60 frames per second, but we, shot it whatever. Like, we don't have the film for this, right? Like it doesn't work like that.
But I agree. Like they made choices based on what they wanted to get across, and sort of how these movies were, influenced the style that they were sort of going for. I can't speak highly enough of this movie. Like you said, there are moments where it's not perfect, it's not polished, it's not this, but because we're expanding on parts of the folklore of these characters, we're not looking to tell their life story in a way that sort of goes paragraph by paragraph. We're looking to expand, what we know about the folklore of these characters and sort of their sort of cultural impacts as they, reverberated to the country. I mean, the fight at the OK Corral wasn't even known about until the early 1900s, like 1920s.
Sure.
And so it was one of those things that like had to be written down and had to be told to people. So the fact that we are sort of interpreting these characters based on what we know about them personally, but also what we know about their reputations, it's really sort of fantastic. And it plays into the imagination of the genre, the genre plays into our imagination, where the Wild West was a land of possibilities, and it's all based on this word of mouth telling and retelling of stories and about how big these characters were, not just in real life, but it's sort of popular culture.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Very similar to what I think we're starting to see now with superhero movies.
Okay.
I think that.
Tell me about that.
Well, I've always said that the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Disney, which by the way, Disney owns the distributing rights now to Tombstone.
Do they?
I went to like look on my cable subscription to see like, hey, is this offered by any channel I can watch it for free? And it wasn't, but it said $3.99 Walt Disney Studios. So I think Disney acquired the distribution rights of Tombstone in the 20th Century Fox deal. They had to have. I haven't looked that up yet.
Nope.
But
nope. They originally distributed it.
Really?
Yep. It was originally distributed by Buena Vista Pictures, which is Disney.
I had no idea.
Yep.
You learn something new every day. That's not something I looked up beforehand. That was I had intended to.
Nope.
But
it 100% is was originally a Walt Disney. Yeah.
Great. So Josephine's a Disney princess. Bet. I'll take that. No,
I would say Doc Holliday's a Disney princess before anybody.
Yeah. Talk about like the anti-hero. He's like it just an interesting one to look at. But no, I've always sort of said time and time again that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, what they've done a really good job of is two things. One, they do a really great job of not making the same movie twice.
Sure.
So like take for instance, the Captain America trilogy, so to speak. You've got the first one, which is a sort of fictional, historical fiction. The second one, which is this like spy movie, action spy movie. The third one is the sort of characteristic superhero film. That is what I think was their litmus test for if we can do Infinity War and Endgame very well. So I can say that they probably made the three of the same movie in that regard. But even then, the Russo brothers described Infinity War as a heist film, which I agree with. I agree with their assessment on that. But
not Endgame.
No, Endgame. With this sort of time travel element, I see what you're getting at there, but I didn't see them describe Endgame as that.
Fair.
But like I said, like they have done a very good job of sort of taking the superhero movie and then like extrapolating another genre on top of it. The Spider-Man movies, the fact that those are, like high school coming of age stories at times is really fascinating. But all of this is to say that like what they've done a really good job of is doing that, but they've also done a really great job of expanding the bounds of what's possible, and all using these characters and the folklore that has been created throughout the comics, and using them to sort of continue to expand what's possible in the movies and now in television.
Sure.
And I know that you feel it very, very similarly about Star Wars, though.
I do. Yeah. I think not even so much in the folklore of the characters aspect, but just in like Star Wars basically hits the same plots constantly, especially in The Mandalorian. It's like you have, they might not be Native Americans or Mexicans, but it's the same stories, right? Like it's exactly the same. It's all built on these stories of the westward expansion of the Wild West, of this post Civil War America is directly, especially in The Mandalorian, is directly where these stories come from, of this otherness, this like this ragtag sort of guy from the sticks that makes it to be the hero kind of thing.
Yeah, I see that so much, and there's so many direct like references to Westerns. Most recently Cara Dune was the sheriff of basically her province or whatever. Working together with local law enforcement on a larger mission, very similar in Tombstone, where they're locals, but then they have to turn to federal agents to be able to protect the people and to sort of get retribution for things that happened. But both of these things hit very different sort of things. Whereas, you were saying The Mandalorian, quite literally, whether it's aliens, but
right.
it's sort of the same themes. And I feel like,
season 2, episode 1's called The Marshal.
Yes. But
they're not exactly hiding it in The Mandalorian.
No, absolutely not. But then when it comes to the MCU and these superhero movies, what I think is what they have done is they take, they're taking space and, this sort of greater than the things that are greater than ourselves sort of aspect of the comic book folklore. And they are sort of pushing the bounds of what's possible and like expanding what, our imaginations can sort of think up, as we continue to wait for these films to come out and these TV shows to come out. And all the while, they're playing around with genres that have never really been attributed to superhero films. Meanwhile, The Mandalorian is like, well, we're going to stick to what we know. We have a universe that we've actually been very successful in sort of taking the Western themes and sort of taking Colt 45s and turning them into lasers.
Right.
And then we've suddenly been able to do it very successfully for, decades. So we're going to continue to do that in The Mandalorian in a smaller scale. And it's very successful.
Well, yeah, there's the only difference between The Mandalorian and every John Wayne movie is space, basically.
And John Wayne.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need an actor who literally, seriously, we're going back to the Tracy Morgan comparison. John Wayne was literally John Wayne in every film. He just had a different name based on what the film was, and he just played the same character.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, he's one of the guys that the Western was based around, sort of,
And I think I read somewhere that John Wayne briefly met Wyatt Earp. I may be making
probably
that up.
Wyatt Earp died in like 1931, so like it's not at all impossible.
But it's just
like the gap between Wyatt Earp and Captain America was like 5 years or whatever.
Yeah. Steve Rogers would have met Wyatt Earp. That would have been a really cool sort of thing that they could have done.
No, I mean in real life, like between the existence of Wyatt Earp and the existence of Captain America.
Oh, like the comic
book being written, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's what I really love about like making these comparisons is that like, so much of the folklore of these people were word of mouth, and they're so we're sort of relying on their reputations to sort of interpret these characters. Meanwhile, in modern day, everything's written down that we're, sort of referencing. So whether you're talking about the DCEU or the MCU, or even Star Wars. I mean, if you look at the new trilogy, we're sort of interpreting and reinterpreting characters based on what's been written down. That's a huge difference, I think, because you can play Wyatt Earp so many different ways, but so many people get stuck in the characters that have been written down, and feel that they are less successful because they don't stick to the script, so to speak, which is the original material.
And I think that's a hallmark of this whole last 15 years of movies, is that like it's all the same stories to some extent. Like, I mean, the entire MCU's existed between now and then, but it's like, people complain about, oh, there's so many remakes, there's so many sequels, and like even the air quote original movies that come out, just a lot of them feel like they're part of some sort of not cinematic universe, but like they're just trying to tell the same stories over and over again. Like nothing original feels like it sells right now. To the point where even where Disney will do something like The Mandalorian or like WandaVision and be like, oh my God, this is so original. And it's like, it is the way they're doing it is, I guess, but it's still characters that you care about, right? Like there's no risk here.
Yeah. You've already bought into the series before it was even made. I mean, we have been going on an adventure with Wanda Maximoff for several movies now. We know her just because she's now being featured in a television series that, is sort of derivative of the sitcoms of the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Doesn't change the fact that we care about Wanda Maximoff and that we're still telling her story, right?
Or that we care about sitcoms.
Well, but sitcoms have changed so much too. Like I thought that was a really cool thing that they were able to do and sort of play up in this series.
I 100% agree, but it's not exactly like people are being like, oh man, like Modern Family, that show sucked. I hate that. I'm so mad they made an episode that was reminiscent of Modern Family and The Office, right? It's like, that's still a sell. There's nothing risky about that show. I'm not saying everything that you need to take a risk, but it's like, it's all derivative.
Right. But even Tombstone, I mean, if you look at Tombstone, how many stories have been told about Wyatt Earp in the past?
Oh,
and
dozens.
In fact, within 6 months, they had another story about Wyatt Earp that came out shortly afterwards with an A-list celebrity. They're
borrowing from 70 years of Hollywood Westerns, right? Like it's not any different.
Yeah, I feel like we're just recycling the problem. Like the problem has just been recycled over and over again. And when you find something that, may have been influenced, or something that is, I don't know. I'm trying to think of I'm trying not to be so on the nose, but I feel like that's why diversity in film has become not just a hot button issue because it's sorely needed, but also you're getting some quality material out of this in ways that like hasn't been featured before. I mean, like the fact that like Parasite, like I can't imagine that being made any other way in the United States. I'm looking forward to films like Minari, for instance, because we're able to tell stories that are so unlike ourselves. I mean, and that's what made Black Panther so incredibly successful, was because it took a story about, an African king, and elevated the story beyond just, Black characters being gangsters and Black characters being stereotypical slaves or this or that or the other thing. And I feel like you can do that in these polished Hollywood films like Black Panther, but you can also do it in a movie like, what's the one with on Netflix with Heimdall and the kid from Stranger Things. It's not Urban Cowboy. It's about the horses in Philadelphia. But I mean, you get what I'm saying. Like, have you not seen it?
No. What is this?
Yo. Okay. So I'm going to pause here for a second. All right. We're going to talk about, what was it on? Where's my Netflix app on this phone?
With Idris Elba?
Yes. Idris Elba. Found Netflix. It's called, hold on, Netflix. Doo-doo. There's my profile. Continue to home. Idris. It's called Concrete Cowboy. It was made, it's with him and Caleb McLaughlin, the kid from Stranger Things. It's about...
that is not at all the kid from Stranger Things I thought you were going to talk about when you said kid from Stranger Things.
No, it's apparently... So the description of it is, sent to live with his estranged father for the summer, a rebellious teen finds kinship in a tight-knit Philadelphia community of Black cowboys. And it's based on a true story of like concrete cowboys, about a neighborhood of Black folks that have horses in the city. Like it looks really cool. And Caleb McLaughlin, I met him. I was an intern at the Glimmerglass Festival in 2012, and he was in production of Lost in the Stars. It's based on Cry the Beloved Country, about an African priest during apartheid, and his relationship with his son. And he was a young boy in that film, or in that opera. And so I met him briefly. He was about to go on to Broadway as young Simba, great kid, went on to Broadway, did the role again at Washington National Opera, did the Stranger Things. Now he's on to this. Apparently there's rumors that he's going to be the next Static Shock. I mean, like, Caleb McLaughlin is like the future of film, and he's really great. But no, this movie, I've seen articles before this about sort of concrete cowboys in real life, and so it was really cool to see that the film was made.
Dang, I did not know that. I gotta watch that. Dang.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sneaked by on Netflix, but yeah, it's gonna be a good one.
Man, Cry the Beloved Country, I watched that James Earl Jones movie back in like school, I think. I had not thought about that piece of literature in years. Yeah,
the musical technically was Kurt Weill, and it's a really interesting piece. It was and it's
I'm sorry, did you say Kurt Weill did a musical based on Cry the Beloved Country?
Yeah, it was back in the days of musical theater, before there were microphones and before there was this. So the advent of amplification, before that, musical theater and opera were very like close. They weren't the same, but I mean, you saw a lot of classical influences in things like South Pacific, and you saw classical influences in things like West Side Story and like things like that. But so that was before the advent of amplification. So something like Kurt Weill, where a Black chorus and Black members of your principal cast weren't allowed on the stages of the Met. So they found homes in places like Broadway. Or theaters similar to that. At least that's how I remember it. If someone reads it differently and would like to give me an updated, version of history that is more accurate than what I'm describing, again, I'd be happy to hear it. But my understanding of it was that that's where pieces like Lost in the Stars found homes, was in theaters that weren't like the Met, where they hadn't been integrated yet. So it's fascinating sort of thing to see, whenever it comes to an opera company near you. But again, those things are rare sometimes because companies can't, and especially now in coronavirus where, once places are opening up, they're like, okay, well, we're going to do the same old tired versions of La Boheme, or we're going to do this, or we're going to, I think
you go see a lot of white people in Hamilton, tell you that much.
Yeah. Well, Virginia Opera, for instance, is doing a scaled down Das Rheingold, the Richard Wagner opera, at Topgolf here and in Richmond. I kid you not. A socially distant experience outdoors,
like at the Virginia Beach Topgolf.
Virginia Beach Topgolf and the Richmond Topgolf.
Oh my God, I got to go to that.
I have never been more intrigued by a concept in my entire life. I have seen.
How do you think old Dick Wagner would feel about that?
I think he would be appalled. He was an appalling human being.
Maybe they could do the whole ring cycle next.
A Topgolf ring would be top-notch entertainment, I think.
I think people would just start hitting balls at them at some point.
I have no idea how they're going to tie in the golf part of it, but we'll get there.
Man, that's wild. Ooh, okay. So James, bring me back to Tombstone. What is it about this movie that you love so much that has stuck with you? Tell me your history with the movie a little bit.
So, I mean, I spoke about this earlier about how everyone literally was introduced to this movie from their parents.
Sure.
So my parents did. I can't remember distinctly which, like in the timeline where it was. But I know that I was introduced to it by my parents. I somehow watched it over and over again. It's one of those movies that's on television constantly. And so you jump into it and then you finally, we have that on VHS. Well, let's get it on DVD because no one watches VHS anymore. And then you watch it with the family, and then suddenly it's your favorite film as a family, and it's quotable, and your mom's gifting you random I'm your Huckleberry t-shirts, and you're buying Funko Pops because they come out. Like, I mean, it's literally just one of those things where you don't know how, I don't know when or how, but it suddenly came in my life and it's never left.
What is that? For all the listeners that are going to watch this movie and ask, what the hell does that line mean? I'm your Huckleberry. He says it what, twice, 3 times? He
says twice.
Twice, yeah.
He says it once when, don't any of you have the guts to play for blood? And he says, I'm your Huckleberry. And then he says
it to Johnny Ringo.
He does. Well, that was Johnny Ringo the first time. And then he says it again to him at the second time. And he says, well, I didn't think you were going to show, or you have the guts to show. And he says, I'm your Huckleberry. Fight's not with you, Holiday. I beg to differ. Play for blood. Something like that.
Yeah. The fight was definitely with him that day.
Yes. But it's little things in the film too that just get you every time. You know, apparently, I don't know if this was stated in the film or if it was stated in real life, but Doc Holliday believed that he would die with his boots on, that he thought he would be shot or killed or something. He didn't think that tuberculosis was going to kill him. Right. So it eventually did.
He did his best to die in other ways.
Yeah. And so he dies. He says, that's funny. And he passes away. I think the whole romantic aspect of it is very silly. But it's sort of endearing in its own early 90s way. And especially the end where he says, I have nothing left, no money, nothing to offer you, but I promise you, I'll love you till I forget the exact words, but I love you till the end of time, essentially. And she's like, that's okay, Wyatt. My parents are rich. Like, okay, if we could all be so lucky.
Right.
They continue to embark on a series of adventures, you know, the quotability of the film, and in ways that, like, I'm notorious for like finding things funny and then like having to tell people why I find them funny. And then it's no longer funny to them at all. It's just strange.
Right.
So like when people will say something to me, I'll just go, pardon? Because that was in the scene where he goes, that old dog Trey. Sounds like old dog Trey to me. And he's like, pardon? You know, Stephen Stinkin' Foster. Like, no, this serves a nocturne. He's like, what? No, you know, Frederick fucking Chopin. A line that I didn't get the first time I watched it. It had to be a couple of times through it. And because I was a music major, I'm like, oh, I know who Chopin is. Ha ha. Like, that's kind of cool. Or
nerd.
Yeah, right. Or think I got 2 guns, 1 for each of you.
Some fantastic one-liners in this movie, just constantly.
Yeah, and everyone loves "I'm Your Huckleberry." I think yes, it's the most iconic line there. But like, there's so much.
There's right at the beginning when Curly Bill is terrorizing the Mexicans, and the guy's like, "Go to hell," and he shoots him dead in the face and goes, "You first."
Oh yeah, and like, what's cool is that I watched this on Amazon, and they even. For most of it, probably minus like a couple of lines in the conversation in Latin between Ringo and Holiday in the middle of the film, they interpret everything. Like the subtitles at the bottom, they show you every bit of the conversation.
I rented this from Apple TV and it did the same thing. I think that like there were some things that were intentionally left untranslated. Because like some of the Spanish was intentionally untranslated because then they had the conversation about what the guy actually said.
Well, that was on Amazon. The whole thing was translated for that. If you go to IMDb again, if you go to the trivia, they will detail what they were speaking about in Latin and then why it was significant. Yeah, I forget why, but there's some significance to it and why it was the conversation went the way it did. Oh man. Well, but I also loved sort of the strange qualities of the film. Like, I love the strange lesson we learn about like empathy in the very beginning when Wyatt Earp you first see Wyatt Earp and he goes to confront the guy handling the horse. Yeah. And he's smacking the horse around. He just takes the knot, smacks the guy with it. And he says, hurts, done it. He's like, now leave it and go about your business. You know, like, what a strange lesson in empathy to learn, like in the first like 5 minutes of a film. Like, oh wow, like you're teaching us that, you know, horses have feelings too.
Yeah, it definitely tries to make some, and there's just some bizarre scenes too. I mean, the whole theater scene is crazy. They are listening to Dance Macabre and watching the play or whatever, and it turns out it's this woman the whole time, and like.
And he's like just super attracted to her, even though she's underneath the lights that's shaded by like a bottle of whiskey. I always like look out for that part where the guy just looks silly in front of the light. Like, okay, I'm going to do this. Give you a different color light.
Again, that's a great Holiday line when she pulls the mask off and does her bow and Wyatt's like, well, I'll be damned. And Wyatt, what does he say? You says, may be if you get lucky.
Yeah. And he says, in the bar, they says something about, you know, what's a maiden or something, and he says, a maiden pure as the driven snow, I'm sure.
And Morgan gets upset,
and he's like, it's just Doc style, like leave it. We all have that friend that puts something in a context in a way that's like kind of rude and a little bitchy, but just like it's just their style, like leave them alone.
Sure. You go do something or you go stand there and bleed.
I didn't know you was in town. Where are you going with that shotgun? He's going to go confront the man, of course.
Yeah.
You know, we must redefine the nature of our association. Like,
speaking of nature of their
interest.
association. There's a heavy conglomerate of the internet that likes to make fan fiction about Doc and Wyatt.
Oh, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I can only imagine. And being in 2021, I'm sure it's very creative.
I've read many an article about how Doc was like one of the original queer icons.
I mean, it would make
Despite-
sense. I mean, he's such a flamboyant character in that way. I can see sort of that playing to parts of that character.
Apparently, there's a quote from Wyatt Earp on the subject of Doc Holliday where he says, "There was always something peculiar about that Doc Holliday."
Oh no.
Which is just choice the way they used to speak about those things.
There always seems to be some sort of like connection about how someone was either like bisexual or just maybe a closeted gay man in a time where like it was not as acceptable to be out. Like for instance, the huge Hamilton one where, you know, there's the connection between Lawrence and Hamilton. Like that's one that, you know, I think they made like sort of a subtle nod to it in, you know, I think your pants look hot. And it's like, oh, and everyone was like, yes, that's the reference we've been looking for or something. It was okay. It was one line, but I'm sure that we can go down a huge rabbit hole to sort of continue to learn sort of what these characters really were like in real life.
Yeah. And a lot of it we'll never know because, you know, of just the way things weren't written down back then and the way things were written down. You get those reports of like, well, so-and-so, you know, died this weekend and his very good friend that he shared a bed and a bank account with was very upset.
Yeah, that always seems to be like it's the Bert and Ernie effect.
Yes. God.
It's funny. I was watching a Sesame Street special that was on ABC recently, and the whole, you know, popular culture revelation that like they wrote, yeah, Bert and Ernie, you're gay, and like the number of people that were like, huh, I would have never guessed that. I'm like, really?
Yeah,
it makes sense to me. But
where
like,
have you been?
So like it doesn't surprise me when revelations like this come out, like, you know, when people start to chronicle people's history and they say, oh, by the way, here's the stop at, you know, X point in history where they had a love affair with X person. Right. And if that happens to be, you know, of someone of the same, you know, sex or gender, then whoa, you know, like that makes sense to me. Like, sure. I'm not at all like, you know, thinking that it was manufactured somewhere. It just the number of revelations that come up. It's like, oh, okay, well, it makes more sense now. Sort of this reference or this quote or.
Well, and it's wild how many people will look at the amount of people that have, you know, recently come out as some sort of one of the LGBTQIA plus, you know, denominations, and they'll look at the past and go like, why are there so many more gay people today than there used to be? And it's like, I got news for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me. Someone made two comparisons that made so much sense when it came to like, sort of the perspective that people have about, oh, there's so many more trans people, or there's so many more openly gay people. And it's like, well, there were so many people that were left-handed that were told that they were other, and they were disciplined and told that they shouldn't write with their left hand and forced to write with their right hand. So the prevalence of left-handedness has risen over the years because it's become more acceptable.
Right, because we're no longer telling people that they're wrong for being left-handed.
Or like the perspective I saw the other day, I was like, well, you know, I don't understand how someone could be trans. It's like, well, you know, these are not the same thing. But they were saying, well, you know how you feel like a blonde, and like you say, I'm really a blonde, but I'm actually a brunette, even though you act like a blonde. And then you manufacture your hair to the point where you dye it blonde so it could reflect how you feel on the inside. Like, yeah. You don't know what it's like to be trans, even just a little bit.
Yeah.
I read something like that, even though I know that the two are very drastically different, different circumstances for sure.
Sure.
But when it comes to playing up like the empathy towards other people, that's what I get from these film experiences from like the early 90s, even the early 2000s, or I was even rewatching episodes of House where they would say something and I'd look over and just with like gaping, like my mouth, like jaw dropped. Like, did they really just say that? Things that were acceptable to say.
Yeah. Caitlin's been watching Scrubs,
10
like the
years
early
ago.
seasons of Scrubs. And I'm just like, I'll be watching it with her. I'm like, how this show didn't get canceled. I have no idea.
I love watching Major League, but there are things that they say in Major League where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't, I feel almost embarrassed to watch this movie. But I chalk it up to like, well, that was the time. But then I also like have to accept and recognize, well, that's not exactly something that's nice to say or acceptable to say. It's really interesting. The conversations we're having about some of these films. But when I see a film like this, there's Virgil and the women. They didn't say, oh, there's Virgil and their wives or Virgil and Maddie, and they didn't list them off. They just lumped them all together and said, there's Virgil and the women. Good God.
I mean, there's this compared to most Westerns, especially earlier ones, this movie's pretty freaking PC.
I thought so too. Like I there are subtle nods to like, sort of how dated things were at the time.
Sure.
With Sheriff Behan talking about how he sits on the he's the chair of the anti-Chinese League.
Yeah.
And that like not a single person of color can be found in this film until like the OK Corral scene where like you see some I would say Asian folks of like Asian descent that are like there because they are, were working on railroads or whatever circumstance was happening in the West at the time. But like, you definitely don't watch this movie for like its social justice message or inclusivity or any of that stuff. Like, it's not one of those sort of, doesn't have any of those notes whatsoever. And it's certainly dated in some ways, but you're right. Like,
but it also doesn't villainize any groups that way. Like, they're not, it's not the old school Western of the past where like, the band of enemies are Mexican or Native American or Asian or whatever, it's just other white people. And
it's not even the Civil War aspect too, where we're fighting over this political reason.
Past the Civil War.
Yeah, it's not even this political reason. We are fighting over basically
money, literally
over money and authority. Because if your authority goes unchecked, you're suddenly the power broker of this entire town. I mean, that's what was said earlier in the film. Behan, he ain't no law. The only real law around here are the cowboys.
Right. I mean, that's a constant theme, especially in Star Wars. But yeah, across Westerns where just like the law can't do anything. It's up to these vigilantes to stop the other vigilantes.
And I feel like what we've continued to do, what we're seeing now, what I really love are these conversations of like how they're complicated, it's not just one side against the other. It could be, one side, there's no sides really. It's one person, two persons, three persons, four persons, where it's a conflict that sort of has a chain effect and there's no real good or bad people. Like take for instance, like Captain America Civil War, like sure there are two sides, but like they're all influenced by drastically different circumstances in a way that like, you really can empathize or sympathize or empathize with both sides and see where the conflict arose. But they're characters that you all know and love and you've invested time in. And I'm really enjoying some of these stories where it's not necessarily clear cut, like who was right and who was wrong, or there's not a right and a wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I do like the fact that in Star Wars, we have a clear enemy, we have a clear hero, but nothing makes you think more about the roles of the Jedi until you get to the Mandalorian, where the Mandalorian says, I'm supposed to side with, medieval sorcerers that, threaten my people's existence. Like that's pretty cool to sort of go into a gray area and to continue to sort of, in fact, that gray area did exist. Like apparently there are conflicting accounts of just how likable Wyatt Earp was, and Wyatt Earp defends his honor throughout his life, and his wife did afterwards. But like, we don't go into that gray area in these movies like this. We stick to the script when it comes to who's the bad guy and who's not.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that's why I love some of these Western stories, and why I love movies like Butch Cassidy, right? And any of the Jesse James stories, any of the Billy the Kid stories, is that there is no, there's no cops, right? It's not Law and Order. It's just some bastardized version of law that's being carried out by people with no authority against people with no authority. It's all about implied authority, and it's just fascinating to me constantly that like these are the great stories. So like, it doesn't have to be about the sheriff, about the marshal. It gets to be about just these guys who are just guys.
Yeah, I mean, and there at one point in the scene, the cowboys make themselves very clear that they're getting Ike out of prison. He says, "Wearing a badge don't make you right." I feel like that's true regardless of like the movie you're watching, and we see that time and time again. I mean, like Chicago PD, Law and Order. I mean, there are so many different cop shows where like, just because you have a badge doesn't mean the actions that you carry out are necessarily the right thing to do. So whether that's accepted by people or not is, that's the big question. I'm not here to litigate that. But like it's fascinating to see out in the Wild West, although I wouldn't say that too loud, because coming next summer will be like Dick Wolf creating, Law and Order, westward expansion or whatever it'll be called. And it'll be about like the sheriffs of the Old West, and it'll be featured on NBC right after Law and Order SVU. So you better watch out. Don't say it too loud.
I mean, the networks are always going to make shows that I don't care for, right? Like that are maybe good, maybe not. They're going to continue to do that forever.
It's going to run 2 seasons, and we're going to find out that Elliot Stabler's great grandfather was a sheriff in California. And that's, and they're going to have Rob Lowe in it somehow. Yeah. And that's what inspired him to become a cop.
Right. And they'll get Rob Lowe to show up at the Super Bowl wearing an NFL hat to promote it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like although 911 Lone Star.
Although that does well, actually, my mom watches that show and she absolutely loves 911 Lone Star.
I'm sure.
She loves it, and she loves the original 911. And in fact, they're not terrible like shows. They're
I'm sure they're not.
They're fairly entertaining. The stuff that's on now.
I just don't have time for fairly entertaining anymore. Is the thing. Like, if I'm going to sit down and watch a TV show, I need it to be 100%, right? Like, I need it to be The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, season 1, episode 4, constantly.
Oh, it got me at 5. 5 was when I was like, oh, I get it now. Yeah.
Yeah, whichever one. Like, I need it to be Mandalorian season 2, episode 10, or episode 8, the finale. Constantly. Like, it has to be 100%, or I don't have time. I have so many other things to. James, I've read 72 books this year.
The fact that you can read one book, and not based on your own skill level, I mean, just in general, like me having to think about sitting down and reading a book. I've gotten into video games a lot recently.
Yeah, same.
Although that's taken sort of a hiatus because I got stuck on MLB The Show 20. And so now I'm just playing a lot of baseball for like no
Oh, that's all I've been doing this year is listening to audiobooks and playing sports games.
Yeah, I've just been playing
MLB The Show 21 yesterday because my Xbox finally came in. I got the new Xbox Series
good
X.
for you. Good for you. Yeah, I got the PS4. This is my first console in like a decade. So I got it in September and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to catch up on all these games I missed, all these stories. And frankly, like that's what I'm enjoying so much more about these games is that the stories are just top notch.
Yeah.
I've played Marvel's the Spider-Man. I've played the sequel, the Miles Morales.
Oh, dude, they're fantastic.
Well, the first one blew me out of the water. And that was one of the first games I played. So like I couldn't believe it, but like God of War, oh man, the Avengers game, while not the best game as far as like gameplay and such, I love the story. I'm like a huge Con fan.
You don't have to defend why you like a video game to me. Just go for it.
Yeah,
I bought a new Xbox so I could play the newest versions of the sports games. Like I don't give a crap. Like I do whatever I want.
Oh, I've been stuck on MLB The Show 20, and
I will say this: as far I've played 21 for one night, and 20 is way better. Just leave it.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you if that changes, but like so far, 21 kind of sucks.
Well, the only thing I miss is the updated rosters because I'm playing as a team, and I'm like, wait a minute, that player doesn't play there anymore. It's like, oh, he played there.
Yeah,
that's a strange. It's so strange. Like Trevor Bauer plays for the Cincinnati Reds in that game, but he's now playing for the Dodgers. So
is everybody. It's fine.
Well, yeah, unfortunately. But no, I mean, I've got the Final Fantasy remake that I'm trying to play soon. Oh, I played The Last of Us, which I can't wait for to come out on HBO. I'm like,
yeah, that should be really good.
I'm really into, well, first off, I got really tired of playing pandemic induced like apocalypse games because it was sort of, in the middle of a pandemic. But I mean, and that's why Spider-Man sort of shocked me because I was in the middle of playing it and all of a sudden, like 3/4 of the way, it's like, oh, by the way, there's a pandemic. Oh, great. I'm just reminded constantly of the circumstances that we're in.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of these games, God of War was really fascinating. I played, oh my gosh. Oh man. And now I've got a game for the Nintendo Switch that I can't put down. It was a 2018 game called Hades. And it's
you and everybody else. I'm the only human alive that hasn't played Hades.
Phenomenal. I can't put it down. It's just the definition of insanity is repeating an action, expecting a different consequence. And
yes,
I'm clinically insane according to how much I play this game because it's just literally the same outcome every time. So
I mean, hey, whatever works, dude. I've gotten deep into some career modes in some sports games before, deeper than I'm willing to admit. Like I've carried that through too many seasons before, so I'm not one to talk.
Yeah, I am. But some of these games, I mean, Last of Us Part 1 and 2, I was just talk about a story that doesn't have a clear hero and a clear villain.
Sure.
Last of Us Part 2 was one that I felt did a really great job of turning that on its head and just making you think twice about, is what they did right? Is what they did noble? Is what they did what I would have done? Is what they did justified? Video games have been doing a really great job, I feel like, in some of these career modes, or not career modes, but story modes, I suppose, that have just really just sort of blown me out of the water. Really just fantastic.
Fair enough. Well, we got to wrap up. I've got a bacon and eggs score for this movie, James. Our listener score, you gave it 100, I gave it 100. Our listener score was an 87. That gives it a totally, all told, that gives it a bacon and eggs score of a 90.25.
I think that's fair.
Makes it our 6th best movie of all time for this year.
I think that's really fair. Like I said, if 9 out of 10 people liked the film and 1 didn't, I think that's a fair assessment.
It slots right in between Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
I can't compare those. I mean, that's so silly to me. Like, well, I know that's what you do on your show. I know that you sort of put them all on a list, and you sort of say, okay, well, this is how they ranked based on the scores that we gave them.
Right.
I find that to be so challenging, and that's why you guys do what you do.
Well, and that's why we started the numbers, honestly, is because we used to have conversations like, man, did I like Toy Story 4 better than The Dark Knight Rises or better than Get Out? Like,
who are we, the Hollywood Foreign Press?
do I like Love, Simon more than Batman Begins? You know?
Well, I mean, you should like a lot of things more than Batman Begins.
No, James, I really like Batman Begins.
I like Batman Begins, but nothing will beat the shock and awe of The Dark Knight the very first time I saw it.
Sure. Well, The Dark Knight is 4 on this list, and Batman Begins is 21. So
okay, so that's I will.
And
okay,
The Dark Knight is behind Remember the Titans, The Prestige, and Avengers Endgame.
Interesting.
Which I honestly disagree that Avengers Endgame is better than the Dark Knight, but
I will agree. I think Dark Knight is better than Endgame, but I also am of the belief that Avengers Infinity War was the true culmination of 20 years of world building in the MCU, or 10 years of world building in the MCU, and not Endgame. They marketed it as this was the finale and the culmination of. I said, no, the culmination of was the movie before. And you're just picking up the pieces of the last one.
Well, I do just want to inform you that Avengers Endgame or Avengers Infinity War was a different year. So,
ooh, well, that is also a fair point.
So that's why they're not on the list together, is because they are not comparable because they are in 2 different Bacon and Eggs years.
Okay, I'll concede that point.
So we go from October 4th to October 4th.
Because that's when you
fiscal
had
year.
Your years. Great, cool.
Yes. So Avengers Endgame made it 3rd on that year, and Infinity War actually ended up 8th.
What was it 8th to? What were the 7 films above it?
Dead Poet Society, The Force Awakens, Jaws, Empire Strikes Back, Thor Ragnarok, Star Wars, A New Hope, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Okay, those are all respectable films to put.
That's a wild list for the year, and honestly, I think we ended up dropping Holy Grail pretty solidly, as well as for Tyler. I think Infinity War definitely comes above Thor Ragnarok now. But I really liked Thor Ragnarok when I saw it, so that definitely boosted it for me. Like that was what really reinvigorated me to the MCU.
Yeah, it brought a really fresh perspective that I think was needed. And now that we get a second Taika Waititi film. Oh, I saw Jojo Rabbit too. What a strange
fantastic movie.
film.
Fantastic movie.
It was fantastic, but it was strange.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't watch any of his other movies if you thought that was strange.
I mean, no, you have to know what you're going to get. And I wasn't going
I would avoid What We Do in the Shadows if you thought that was strange.
No, I just thought it was hilarious that he played Hitler.
Yeah.
And that it was acceptable for him to do so. Like, oh my gosh. I mean,
at no point is Hitler glorified in that movie.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. No, it was just, I watched it upon recommendation.
Sure.
I don't think I would have watched it by myself.
It's one of my all-time favorite Sam Rockwell roles, honestly. He was so good in that movie.
I can't get over Sam Rockwell in Green Mile. He played such a terrible character there that I can't seem to look at Sam Rockwell and think of him the same way.
Oh man, Sam Rockwell's one of my favorites.
It's like when Jason Bateman played in Juno.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a tough one to get past, right?
Totally crapped on Elliot Page's character for the entire film, and just oh gosh,
who cheats on Jennifer Garner?
Yeah, who are you, Ben Affleck? I mean, come on,
for real. Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez are together and buying a house in Montana. I saw it on Facebook and I was like, wait, like Bennifer is back? Like, when did this happen? Like, I didn't even realize that. I didn't realize that Alex Rodriguez and J-Lo had broken up. I knew that they were like on a rocky patch. And they hadn't actually broken up. I guess I missed it this month. I guess I did. I mean, I think it's been like literally the last week that anybody found out. Like, I don't know. Anyway, this has been Bacon and Eggs. This is a show where we talk about movies. James, it has been so good catching up with you and talking to you about a movie. Thank you so much for being my Tyler this week. I really appreciate you.
No, not a problem. Thank you. I want to thank you and Tyler for the invitation. It's always good to be on Bacon and Eggs. I want to thank your listeners for listening. I know I can ramble a lot, but it's a pleasure to actually come into your devices and to talk about a movie that I love. And for all the listeners out there, wear a mask, get vaccinated when you can, and register to vote.
Hell yeah. That's what I'm talking about. All right, this is Bacon and Eggs. Our graphics are by Vaishon Brandon, graphite.vmb on Instagram, and our music is by Andrew Scott Bell, andrewscottbellmusic.com. Bacon and Eggs is a proud production of the WB&E Podcast Network, of which I am an owner, and so I put my own show on it. But we have lots of great shows that aren't Bacon and Eggs. If you're looking for anything in the realm of podcasts, you got it. But this week, just because we had a really cool episode come out, I'm going to plug the other podcast I'm on the network called Late to the Party, where me and 4 of my friends play Dungeons and Dragons together. It's a really good time. We're still in the middle of our one-shot arc with Brendan Lee Mulligan from College Humor, and it was a great time. So you should go listen to that. Available wherever you get your podcasts and on Spotify. James, any final thoughts? Where can we find you on the internet if we want to see cool tweets by James Swindell?
I don't tweet very often, but I do like to retweet. But if you would like to find me on Twitter, I'm at Jim, Jim Swindell, Swindell. I'm also on Instagram at AT Jim Swindell because just Jim Swindell was taken on Instagram. And even though I reported him for spam or something to try to get him kicked off, he wasn't actually kicked off. So I am at AT Jim Swindell there.
Perfect.
I'm also on the PlayStation Network, Jim Swindell, if you want. Or if you want to send me money, you can send me money on Venmo at Jim Swindell. So
yeah, find Jim on the PSN and trash his games. It's great. It's good times.
Please don't. Unless we want to play Apex. I'm terrible.
Fair enough. Well, all right. I've been Ethan Edgehill. He's been James Swindell. On behalf of Tyler Carlin, this has been Bacon and Eggs. And until next time, arrivederci.
Adios.
There you go. Bye,
Aloha.
video. It's been great.